जगतः पितरौ वन्दे पार्वती परमेश्वरौ जगतः पितरौ वन्दे पार्वती परमेश्वरौ वन्दे पार्वती परमेश्वरौ.
Namaskar everybody. At the outset I would like to say that coming Saturday it is Rigveda Upakarma, and therefore the Sanskrit Samiti has indicated that it's better to have between 7 p.m. and 8 p.m. on the day of Upakarma. So the coming Saturday we will meet between 7 p.m. and 8 p.m. Of course the intimation will be sent in advance. Secondly, the way we have been presenting has undergone, in fact is undergoing a sort of an evolution. The first plan was to cover one sarga per talk, so that in a matter of a dozen sarga hours we may more or less cover the text and proceed to some other text. That was the original idea with which this program was started. However, in the meantime, many people have been asking for more and more detailed explanations and so on. The present scheme is like this. This is my present thinking. There are only 2 more shlokas for the fifth canto, for the third canto to be over, and we will anyhow be completing that today. And the next canto, the fourth canto, the fourth sarga of KumaraSambhavam, is what is called Rati Vilapa. So Rati sees her husband Manmatha reduced to ashes, and therefore she cries. So her weeping and wailing occupies the whole of the next canto, named the fourth sarga. And it's not a very big sarga either. There are some 46 verses there, and what we should do is we will finish that fast. On the other hand, we will take up Sarga 5 in greater detail. Sarga 5 is very interesting, as I have told earlier, that contains the description of Parvati's tapas. We have seen the description of Shiva's tapas in the third canto, and in the fifth canto we will see the description of the tapas of Parvati, which is very interesting. And this is also one of the very popular texts studied in Sanskrit, and therefore we shall pay more attention to the text, and we will give more detailed explanation for each shloka. So after that, after fifth canto, of course the sixth canto is also very interesting, and the rest of the cantos which describe the marriage of Shiva and Parvati and Tarakasura Samhara, that we shall quickly finish. So there are also problems of author issues. So for example, whether some of those sargas were composed by Kalidasa or not is also a moot question among scholars. And anyhow, they do not interest us much, and therefore we will cover that sooner. So the plan is to finish off the fourth sarga rather somewhat quickly, and take up in detail the fifth sarga, which is the most interesting and most studied portion of Kalidasa's KumaraSambhavam. Probably after this text you can take up a text like Shakuntala, which is in fact very, very significant. Most people do not realize the significance of the play Shakuntala. So it's also a text full of dharmic issues, and those who want to know the heritage of India should really study Kalidasa's Shakuntalam. It is generally famous as a love story, but however there are very deep issues in Shakuntalam, and therefore if you want to get an inkling of what our dharmic approach was to life, So you must take a deep look into Kalidasa's Vyakhyana Shakuntalam, and therefore we will take that up after we finish with KumaraSambhavam. So the last time we had this problem of a sudden loss of connectivity, and therefore we had to end it a bit abruptly. Anyhow, we will resume today. There was also one question that was raised in the talk previous to the last one. So a question was sent when I made a reference to Parvati as having three colors, so three complexions because of the guna that she chooses to assume. So Satvika, white complexion, Rajasa, red complexion, and Tamasa, dark complexion. So one question was raised as to whether this will not lead to discrimination, or if Sattva is described as white in color, so will it not lead to importance being attached to people who are white or fair and so on. So this has nothing to do with those social issues where people may admire people who are fair in color. I was once asked a question long ago. A friend of mine suddenly posed a question to me, and he asked me, why is powder white? I couldn't understand the question and I couldn't figure out the answer. I said, I do not know. So then he said, it is because Africans did not rule over us. I couldn't figure out why he is saying that. He said if Africans had ruled over us instead of the British, probably would have preferred dark color, and the color of the powder would have been dark. So it's possible that we have developed a sort of complex regarding complexion, that to look fair like the Europeans is something extraordinary or highly desirable and so on. The havoc created by such a psychology is very much in evidence. So going by the matrimonial ads, or by the kind of the treatment that people give or get on account of the color of their figure and so on. But that has nothing to do with the colors that are stated here. Now, if people indeed still, in spite of themselves, tend to appreciate people who are fairer in complexion, it's only because of physics. A white surface reflects more light, and black bodies absorb light. But however, our own divinities were never inclined to see such complexions of the form. For example, the very name Krishna stands for one who is dark in color. So if you wanted to translate Krishna's name into English, we should say Mr. Dark. So that is the name of Krishna. So of course, root Krishna also means to attract, and therefore we can say that Krishna is one who is attractive, even as Rama was. So Ramante Yoginaha Yasmin is Rama. So Rama is also a person who is very attractive, and therefore Krishna or Kali, so these deities, they are portrayed as dark in color, and yet they were worshipped with the same reverence as would any other god be. So Rama is also known as Neelamegha Shyamala Varna. So he is not fair in color. In fact, this itself can deal a death blow to the Aryan invasion theory. So if that was the case, that Aryans who had the Caucasian blood in them, and therefore they were very fair, and therefore they despised the locals here who are dark, why would they appreciate or worship Rama and Krishna portrayed as dark? So this itself is a very simple answer to that question. So anyhow, in our Puranas, the representation of the various divinities, nor is it very universal. So even being dark, the divinity can be extremely sattvic also. So these are only certain typical instances and typical functions, but they are not very exhaustive. Therefore, this must be taken as only typical. So sometimes the function and the form, so the link is very transparent, and sometimes they are not transparent due to various other complexities, and therefore let that question distract us for too long and detain us for too long. So we will now resume the third canto of KumaraSambhavam. We were doing shloka 74. We had just finished shloka 74. Tamasha nignam vignam tapasas tapasvi vanaspatim vajrayava vabhajya स्त्री सन्निकर्षं परिहर्तुमिच्छन् अंतर्दधे भूतपतिः स भूतः. So Lord Shiva, then he just avoided that place and he just disappeared from there, and we do not know where he went, and therefore along with his ganas, along with the bhutas, so sabhutaha bhutapatihi, he just disappeared because he wanted to avoid all proximity to humankind. So stri sannikarsham parihartam icchan. So it is one thing to say that the best of yogins are not distracted by the presence of women. In fact, in Kalidasa's Vyakhyana Shakuntalam, there is a description in the 7th canto of sages performing tapas. So there are sages in the ashrama of sage Kashyapa. Kashyapa is different from Kashyapa, who appears in the first act. This in the ashram of that sage, there are many sages who are performing tapas even in the presence of the Apsaras ladies there. So, Stri Sannidhau Sanyamaha, he says. So, therefore, the best of the sages are indeed not affected by the presence of the opposite sex, as Kalidasa himself had described in the first canto. Vikara hetau sati vikriyante yesham na chetamsi ta eva dhiraha. Those indeed are dhiras, the truly courageous, whose minds are not disturbed and distracted on account of causes that can very well tend to detract them from the goal. So it is only such persons who can be called yogins or dhiras and so on. Shiva, being the Yogeshwara, must obviously be not subject to such kinds of temptations and so on, and no amount of such temptations can disturb him. We also find, for example, in the case of Lord Vishnu himself, so while he was performing tapas, so Indra once again tried to disturb, and a most beautiful damsel was sent, and Lord Vishnu merely smiled at this situation of his tapas being supposed to be intended to be disturbed, and he just patted on his thigh, and then was born this Urvashi. So that is why one etymology gives Urvashi as born from the Uru, or the thigh. So there is one etymology. There are other etymologies also. And there is also the situation of Tilottama, for example, who is a little more beautiful than the most beautiful damsel that was sent to disturb the tapas and so on. And thus we find that these divinities are not really disturbed, but they tend to behave like us human beings. For example, Shiva trying to avoid the very presence of women folk here. So it's only to show that sometimes it is desirable not to have disturbing and distracting factors around, so that we can focus better. It's only a person who is very well established in tapas who would not be disturbed, but even then, the ideal condition is one where there are no distracting elements. So, anyhow, Lord Shiva chose. So it's a question of one's choice. One may say, okay, I'll show you my prowess. I'll show you how I cannot be disturbed by any of these factors. So one can take it up as a challenge and do that. Or one can say, so why should I be here at all? So let there be no scope for any unpleasant situation for anybody, because it is the other person who may be landing in a situation of unpleasantness rather than one's own self. And therefore, in any case, choosing not to be in that place anymore, Lord Shiva just disappeared. So, Sabhutaha Bhutapatihi Antardadhe. So Antardadhe is from root antar plus root dha. So the word antardhana is also similarly derived from the same root. It's a cognate expression, and therefore Lord Shiva just disappeared from that place. Stri sannikarsham prihartum ichan. So desiring to just avoid the presence of women there. And he had thus destroyed Manmatha, who was the very embodiment of the Vyakhyana of tapas. So, Tamash Vyakhnam tapasaha tapasvi or Shiva vanaspatim vajraiva avabhajya, like the thunderbolt destroying a tree. So was Manmatha destroyed by Lord Shiva, and as we saw earlier, it is because of tapah paramarsha rather than anything else. If Kama itself is something that should not be there, then it would have been wiser that Kama would not have been created at all, or should not have been created at all, or destroyed as soon as he was created. That is not the case. Kama has its rightful place in life, and therefore Manmatha is allowed to function, and it's only here where he comes as the impediment for tapas that Shiva gets angry with him, and he is destroyed now. And as you can see later in the later sargas of KumaraSambhavam, we can see that Kama is restored to life. In fact, the various gods themselves request Lord Shiva that Kama be restored to life, and therefore Manmatha once again comes back to life, and therefore his function goes on, and but for him there would be no life at all. So it is only when he functions out of place and out of time, so that it is considered anomalous, and therefore it needs to be punished. There is a saying in English, dirt is anything out of place and out of time. So order is everything in its place, and a place for everything, and everything in its place, and therefore these things have their own role in their life, in their rightful place, and if that is not followed, then some disasters will definitely ensue. So there is a saying in English, beware of shortcuts, they can cut you short, and that's what happened here. This was an abortive experiment of Manmatha, and therefore he himself had to face the consequences. So it did not affect Shiva finally, and it rather turned back upon himself. So thus Lord Shiva has now disappeared, and the effect of this upon Rati has just now been detailed in the previous verse. It is shown how even as fire emanated from the third eye, so the way it darted forth, so made Rati lose her consciousness. She just could not bear to see the consequence, namely Manmatha being reduced to ashes, nor could she even imagine, and therefore she had fallen into a fit of swoon. That was her situation. The effect upon Parvati is detailed in the next two verses. Shloka 75 says, Shailatmajapi pituruchirasobhilasham vyartham samarthya lalitam vapuratmanascha sakhyos samaksham cha adhikajata lajja shunya jagama bhavana abhimukhi kathanchit. Now this was the greatest disappointment for Parvati. The frustration that she now faced was something unlimited and unimagined. Shailatmaja refers to Parvati. So she now came to deem as just a futile thing. Two things she came as to deem as futile. Number one, the abhilasha of her father, Pituhu Abhilasham, the desire of her father. So her father was quite serious and quite ambitious that Parvati should seek the hand of Lord Shiva and become his wife rather than of any other person. So there were In fact, as we can see from the fifth canto, there were many other gods who were waiting to see if they could get the luck of their life in getting Parvati as their husband, so as their wife. So that was not to be the case, and as Narada had clearly indicated that she is destined to marry Lord Shiva and none else, her own father was too keen on this alliance happening. He himself would have gone to Shiva and asked him, so seeking his hand, but he was afraid that Shiva may spurn that and that would lead to a great embarrassment, and therefore Himavan, the father of Parvati, thought that it would be best if Parvati earned that grace of Lord Shiva by going to his place where he is performing tapas and being of some assistance to him and serving him and honoring him and worshipping him. So if these acts are done, a day will soon arise when his kind glances are turned towards her and he may be impressed by her dedication and service, and therefore will be attracted that way in a sattvic manner, and this marriage will come about. That was his own idea, and therefore the abhilasha of her father was now vyartha. So that she discerned now. Samarthya means discerning that her father's ambition was now all become a waste, become futile. And there is a beautiful qualification for her father. Uchchirasaha means a person with his head raised. So, which is to say, he is a man of great dignity, and therefore dignified that he was, lofty that he was. So it is both literal and metaphorical. The peaks of the mountain Himalaya, so they are all very tall, of a very great altitude, and Himalaya himself was a person of a very exalted outlook and so on, and therefore exalted that he was, so Uchchiras. So his desires and ambitions were also equally noble and great, and a person of great dignity, he would not stoop to beg someone of something. So he is a king of mountains, and therefore it would be not in keeping with his dignity and decorum to bend low and beg for anything, even if it was for the sake of a worthy bridegroom for his dear daughter. Now Parvati came to feel that the deep desire that her own father cherished in his mind regarding her getting a worthy husband, namely Shiva, was now all gone futile, because Shiva had even deserted the place and was no more to be seen there, and there was no occasion anymore for her to try to win his heart through her services, through her sincerity, and perhaps to her own appraisal of her own beauty. Lalitam vapuhu atmanaha. Parvati perhaps had a streak of a feeling that she was exquisitely beautiful. She must have been complimented by dozens of people, so regarding her extraordinary beauty, and therefore Lalitam vapuhu means her graceful form. So she thought, one day or the other, this will also impress Lord Shiva, and he will be attracted towards her, or he will be impressed by that. So Atmanaha vapuhu api vyartham samarthya. So this is the second thing that she discerned was certainly of no avail, and therefore she thought that Atmanaha lalitam vapuhu vyartham samarthya. So two things. One is Uchchirasaha pituhu abhilasham vyartham samarthya, and number two, Atmanaha lalitam vapuhu vyartham samarthya, deeming that even her own beautiful frame was to no avail here. Parvati was now rather depressed, and what added to the depression was, see, Kalidasa is an extraordinary psychologist. He says that Parvati perhaps would have been less embarrassed had it happened in privacy, in utter privacy. Now this has happened in the presence of her two friends, so Jaya and Vijaya. So Sakhyoho Samaksham, right in the presence of her friends, Iticha Adhika Jata Lajja. Friendship is generally between equals, and therefore these two are her equals. Now, when such a situation happens, some embarrassment happens before elders, it may perhaps be somehow tolerated and pocketed. But if it happens in the presence of inferiors or in the presence of equals, certainly it becomes rather embarrassing. And therefore, Adhika Jata Lajja, she became the more abashed now that she was less embarrassed. In this embarrassment took place right in the presence of her friends. So Shunya Jagama Bhavana Abhimukhi Kathanchit. So full of bashfulness, so she proceeded now homewards. So Bhavana Abhimukhi, towards her home, Kathanchit, with a great effort. It's as though she would not like to return even to her own home. So she has no face to show, as it were. So she was confident, in fact her mother and her father were confident that one day or the other Lord Shiva's mind would be turned towards her, and she is destined to marry him. After all, this marriage is bound to take place. It's only a question of time. This must have been the impression, but that was not to be the case. So she now began to proceed homewards, Bhavana Abhimukhi Jagama. So with her heart utterly vacant, so Shunya, so utterly absent-minded, she now proceeded full of despondency. So Kathanchit means with great efforts, so her feet would not proceed even homewards. So she had become so desperate and despondent. So this situation of Parvati becoming extremely dejected on account of this rejection by Lord Shiva has been beautifully portrayed here. This is the Sant now.
शैलात्मजापि पितुरुच्छरसोऽभिलाषम् शैलात्मजापि पितुरुच्छिरसोऽभिलाषम् व्यर्थं समर्थ्य ललितं वपुरात्मनश्च शैलात्मजा पितुः उच्छिरसः पितुरभिलाषं व्यर्थं समर्थ्य आत्मनश्च वपुः ललितं वपुः व्यर्थं समर्थ्य सख्या समक्षमिति चाधिकजातलज्जा शून्या जगाम भवनाभिमुखी कथञ्चित् सख्या समक्षमिति चाधिकजातलज्जा अधिकजातलज्जा शैलात्मजा शून्या जगाम भवनाभिमुखी जगाम शैलात्मजा कथञ्चित् शून्या भवनाभिमुखी जगाम.
Now, it did not take much time for Shiva to get to know for her father to get to know. Before that, I'll give a quick summary in Sanskrit itself, because some people have asked for that. So, Hara eva varo varaha matputriyaha iti chintayati sma Himavan. That's what Himavan had thought. He was the best bridegroom for her. Mani Himalayaha Nagadhirajaha iti sujayitameva Himantam Uchchirasam Darshayiti Kavihi. So he is the king of mountains. Tasya Manoratho Vyartha Sanjataha. Himalaya Bhumau Tadrasthane Aruchehe Karanat Shivaha Kwapi Vinirgataha. Evam अनवकाश प्रसंगः मानिनः पितुः नगराजस्य हिमवतो मनोरथस्य. There no more was any chance for that. अथ च स्वकीयं सौन्दर्यं कदाचिदपि वशीकुर्यात् शिवहृदयम् इति महती काङ्क्षा पार्वत्याः हृदि वर्तते स्म. स्ववपुर्लालित्यं हरस्य विषये अकिञ्चित्कारी इत्यपि अधुना सम्यगवगतम् उमया. अथ च सर्वमिदं स्वसखी सान्निध्ये एव सञ्जातम् इत्यपि खेदः अधिकः पार्वत्याः. आप्तसखीत्वय समक्षमेव जातमेवम् इति महत्तरलज्जाप्रसङ्गः. यथा मल्लिनाथो ब्रूते, समानजनसमक्षं यो भवत्यवमानः सः अतितमाम् असहनीयः. अतितमां दुस्सहः समानमयोरूपविद्यादीनां पुरतः एव सञ्जायमानः अपमानः. भग्नोत्साहा पार्वती अधुना शून्या जाता. अस्यां स्थितौ सा स्वगृहं प्रति प्रस्थितवती. The next verse. सपदि मुकुलिताक्षीं रुद्रसम्रम्भभीत्या दुहितरमनुकम्प्यामद्रिरादाय दोर्भ्यां सुरगज एव बिभ्रत् पद्मिनीं दन्तलग्नां प्रतिपथगतिरासीत् वेगदीर्घीकृताङ्गः. Now, in this verse, so in the previous verse and in this verse, we can find that the meter is changing. So, the previous verse is in the Vasanta Tilaka meter and this is in the Malini meter. So, towards the end of a canto, the poets normally change the meter to indicate that this canto is over and the next canto is going to begin. So, Sapadi Mukulitakshim Rudra Samrambha Bhitya. So, Parvati had now closed her eyes. Mukulitakshim. It is as though the closing of the eyes was involuntary. So, at once, Sapadi. So, Sapadi Mukulitakshim Rudra Samrambha Bhitya. Now, what must have enveloped Parvati was also the fright of Shiva's anger towards her too. So, even though she was innocent, even though she did not have any motive of disturbing the tapas of Shiva, which was indeed the offense committed by Manmatha, so still she was afraid. So many times it so happens that it is best not to be in the presence of a boss who is angry. So even if you have not committed any mistake, if the boss has been angry with some other fellow who has committed some great mistake and has been shouting, so it's best for the servant to be just get away from the place as soon as possible so that he is not within the range of his vision, because that some portion of that anger may also turn towards this person, and therefore, as it were, Parvati was damn afraid. Rudra Samrambha. Samrambha means that fit of anger. So Bhitya, on account of the fear of that, her eyes had automatically closed, so she could no more bear to see Lord Shiva. Actually, Lord Shiva has just disappeared, but by then she had already closed her eyes. Rudra Samrambha Bhitya Mukulitakshim Sapadi. And Himavan would have probably automatically come to know. So, what happened to his daughter? We do not know, and Kalidasa does not detail how it was communicated to him. So, probably the wailing of the gods in the sky, so that must have reached Lord Himavan. So, who speaks to or sky high, and therefore he must have got to know of the fate of the gods also, who were all in great stress and distress on account of this situation transpiring, and therefore Himavan hastened towards his daughter. So, Duhitaram Anukampyam Adriradaya Dorbhyam. So, he knows the fate of his daughter now, and so he grieves that situation, and he knows that she should not be left to fend for herself, and he is there to console her and therefore to support her and so on, and therefore towards his daughter Anukampyam Duhitaram. So Anukampya means fit to be pitied upon. Duhitaram is daughter. Just by way of linguistic notes, the word duhitru in English is the source of inspiration for the English word daughter. You can go by the spelling also, D-A-U-G-H-T-E-R. So one could have the spelling D-O-T-T-E-R for daughter. So why we have this spelling for this word D-A-U-G-H-T-E-R for this is also a factor that betrays its etymological history. So we can see that many words in Sanskrit also appear with slight variations in Greek and Latin and so on. So the word, for example, Pitru becoming father. So in German it is Peter. So Pitru, Peter, father. Mother, Mutter in German. So and becoming mother in English. And the son is from Sanskrit. Sonu is son, and so on. So many of the words that represent the relatives. So all these words show great kinship, and these are cognate expressions. And therefore, duhitaram anukampyam. So adriradaya dorbhyam. So Lord Himavan came there, and then so her father Himalaya, he came there and took her, so with his two arms, dorbhyam, adrihi, adri means mountain, adrihi, dorbhyam tam adaya. So he lifted her virtually with his hands, and he took her there, took her to the home. So dorbhyam adaya, taking her by his arms, he went homewards. So he was on his way back now. Pratipatha gatihi asit, last line. So he went back now. He was now going homewards. Pratipatha means the opposite direction. So that is homewards. Pratipatha gati asit. He was now advancing homewards. Vega dirghi kritangaha. So on account of the Vega, so the speed with which he was going, so he wanted to take her home and make her relaxed, and obviously Parvati's mother Meena would also be very eager to see the daughter and console her and so on. And Parvati herself would no more like to be in that place where she was thus embarrassed and humiliated and shown that all her physical beauty with all its attractions and so on would be of no account in the case of the person like Shiva. So any woman would naturally feel, any young girl would naturally feel that if her beauty doesn't impress ultimately her lover, it is going to be of no use. And therefore that is the case with Parvati too. And so all her charm, physical charm, was to no avail in the presence of Shiva. So, and also all her service. So, and that was because of the misdeed committed by Manmatha. So, he thought that he could short circuit and quickly achieve something. So, that is not to be the case, not with Shiva. And therefore, now Himavan was now advancing homewards faster. So Vega is speed. So the speed with which he was going, Dirghi Kritanga, it is as though his limbs were lengthened. So Kalidasa gives a beautiful imagination. So when one walks speedily, it is as though one is stretching one's feet and so moving his hands forcefully and so on. So of course here Himavan had held Parvati in her hands, and his feet were now pacing towards his home the more and the more fast, and therefore Dirghikrita Angaha. So it is as though lengthened on account of his haste, Vega. And Kalidasa gives a beautiful comparison. There is no situation for which Kalidasa cannot give a comparison. So here he says, Suragajaiva Bibhrat Padminim Danta Lagna. Now imagine the celestial elephant, Suragaja, a divine elephant, so which is carrying the lotus plant, Padminim. The word Padma means lotus. Sometimes the word Padma is used specifically for the lotus flower, sometimes for the lotus plant, but more commonly Padmini is used for the lotus plant. and Padmini sometimes stands for the tank or the pond where the lotus grows, so depending upon the context. And here she is like the lotus plant, Padmini. So Danta Lagnam, so attached to the tusk of the elephant. So adhering to the tusk of this elephant. Suragajaiva Dantalagnam Padminim Bibhrat means carrying. So he was carrying, as it were, the points of comparison, the one-to-one correspondence here are indeed very interesting. So Suragajaha is masculine, so is Himavan masculine. Padmini is feminine, so is Parvati feminine. Parvati herself, then the comparison also very apt. Parvati is herself compared to a lotus very many times, and the pair of arms of Himavan and the two tusks of the elephant, they resemble. And people in the Himalayan region perhaps are quite fair in color, and therefore the tusks of the elephant are also quite fair white in complexion, and therefore the comparison suits very well. And the shape of the arm and the shape of the two tusks also resemble quite well, and therefore on account of all these reasons, so and the way it is carried is also in a very gentle manner, and the arm carrying the lovely body of Parvati, so and the way in which the elephant carries, so even there the resemblance shows itself, and therefore it's a very apt comparison. So it's done with delicacy and consideration and tenderness, and Himavan wanted to take Parvati home because this assignment to which he had given his easy assent. So Parvati also had expressed interest, as we will get to know in the 5th canto. Parvati had also expressed her interest in desiring to serve Shiva, and in some corner of her heart she had the feeling that her superlative beauty would surely draw the mind of Shiva towards her, and therefore her ambition would be fulfilled. Her ambition of marrying him would be fulfilled. But anyhow, all that was shattered, and mentally battered. Parvati could not bear that sorrow, and even as she was with her eyes closed, so Himavan descended there, and then he took her and walked homewards. That's the shloka of the last shloka of this canto.
सपदि मुकुलिताक्षीं रुद्रसंरम्भभीत्या तुहितरमनुकम्प्याम् अत्रिरादाय दोर्भ्याम् सपदि अद्रिः रुद्रसंरम्भभीत्या अनुकम्प्यां दुहितरमादाय मुकुलिताक्षीं दुहितरमादाय दोर्भ्यां सुरगजैव बिभ्रत् पद्मिनीं दन्तलग्नां सुरगजैव बिभ्रत् पद्मिनीं प्रतिपथगतिरासीत् वेगदीर्घीकृताङ्गः अत्रिः पद्मिनीमिव दुहितरमादाय दोर्भ्यां पद्मिनीं दन्तलग्नामिव बिभ्रत् सुरगजैवादाय दोर्भ्यां प्रतिपथगतिरासीत् वेगदीर्घीकृताङ्गः.
So with this, we come to the end of the third canto of KumaraSambhavam. We will now proceed to the fourth canto. And our scheme has been to explain the shloka first and then for Meera to sing next. That is to bring out the niceties of singing also. For example, the way the previous shloka was sung, for example, in say Lalitam Vapuhu or Uchchirasaha. So while singing Uchchirasaha, the pitch was raised and the gentleness of her limbs was shown in Lalitam Vapuhu and so on. So once you know the meaning of a verse, one becomes more sensitive to the nuances of the singing also, and because Meera also knows Sanskrit, and she is able to move the words around and see and convey the anvaya of the shloka very well. So that's also very helpful in understanding the text, we believe. We shall go to the fourth sarga now. The summary in Sanskrit. Rudrakopat bhayameva sanjatam parvatyaha nayane tasyaha mukulite babhuvatuhu tadrishyam avasthayam sthitam duhitaram himavan apashyat bhagna manoratha udvigna cha sa brisham anukampaniya tam dorbhyam grihitva griham prati prasthitaha saha. अत्रापि उपमानं किञ्चित् कविः ददाति यथा नाम सुरगजः दन्तलग्नां कमलिनीम् आदाय गच्छेत् तथा तां निनाय हिमवान् श्वेतः सुरगजः. The celestial serpent is also fair, and Shveto Himalaya, as the very name itself goes. Himalaya is also white in color. Parvati tavat Padminiva Swataha Padminicha. She also belongs to the Padmini class of women, as we referred to earlier. Yatha suragajasya dantadvayam tatha himavataha hastadvayam. Griham prati gachan himavan nana chinta samakulaha vegena gachan asit. Vegena tenacha tasya angani vivruddhaniva bhasante sma iti kavihi nirupayati. Ityevam madana dahanakyoyam tritiya sargaha samapti. We shall now go to the fourth sarga. The fourth sarga is full of weeping and wailing of Rati. So, in fact, to be able to realize that one can describe somebody weeping with so many shlokas, some 45 shlokas, so itself is a revelation. So, Kalidasa is able to do that, and the readers won't get bored. So if someone keeps wailing, we sometimes get bored. So it's only our own weeping when we are in distress that we are never tired of telling others and repeating to others more than once. But there is also a saying in English, laugh and the world laughs with you, and weep and you weep alone. So not many people would be interested in listening to the distress and mourning of people who are in difficulties. So after some time they begin to get distracted and they tired of that. So however, how beautiful weeping and wailing can be seen in this sarga of Kalidasa. So the polish with which it is done, and the fine sentiments of Rati, and the sweet relationship between Rati and Manmatha, and many of such nuances are so very well brought out by Kalidasa in this sarga. So the opening verse says, Athamoha parayana sati vivasha kama vadhur vibodhita vidhina pratipadayishyata nava vaidhavyam asahya vedanam. Now this entire sarga, of course excepting the last verses, is in the meter called Vyogini. So the last two verse is in the last only the last verse of this sarga is in the last two verses in a different meter. So as in the previous case, So this is called Vyogini. The meter itself is representative of the name of the meter itself is representative of the emotion that is portrayed here. Vyogini is a woman who is separated from her lover. So Vyoga is separation. Vyogini, so is a woman in separation. That is the name that is being given to the Vritta, and therefore, in order to show some woman in separation, this is one of the best meters that can be thought of. So this is a special type of Vritta. So we are used to what are called Samavrittas. So where all the four padas have the same scansion. So if you make it into the various ganas as illustrated by Yamata Rajabhana Salagam, so which many of you may know. So all the four padas fall into the same scheme. That is the name of that is the pattern of the Samavritta. Sama means equal. All the four padas in a poem, if they betray the same characteristics, it is called a Samavritta, a uniform meter. Now, Ardha Samavrittas are ones in which the odd quarters are similar and the even quarters are similar, but the consecutive quarters are dissimilar. That is to say, the first pada and the third pada they show the same characteristics, and the second pada and the fourth pada they show the same characteristics. So here the Gana pattern is Sasasa Ja. So 3 Saganas and 1 Jagana. So coming to Sasasaga rather. So and then 3 Saganas and 1 Guru, and then that is in the odd padas, that is in the first and the third. And in the second and the fourth we have Sabhara and Laga. Sagana, Bhagana, Ragana and Lagu Guru. This is the pattern. So Adhamoha Parayana Sati Vivasha Kama Vadhu Vibodhita. So Kama Vadhu is the wife of Kama or Manmatha's wife. So there is Rati now who was in a state of swoon. Mohaparayana Sati, who was in a situation of fit, so fainting fit. Mohaparayana Sati Kamavadhuhu, that is Rati Vivasham, was utterly helpless. Now Providence woke her up. So nobody is allowed to be in one state for too long. There is a continuous alternation of states that we all know. So we all commonly have the 3 states, namely Jagrat, Swapna and Sushupti. So Jagrat is the wakeful state, and Swapna is the state of dreams, and Sushupti is the state of deep sleep. Now there are also a few other states. Now she is in the state of Murcha, and therefore Vibodhita. Now she is woken up. She is restored to her senses by Vidhina, by her fate. So by providence she has been made to wake up, and then Pratipadayishyata Navavaidhavyam Asahya Vedanam. So she has now come to face Vaidhavya, so widowhood. So Vaidhavya, Dhava in Sanskrit means husband, Vi means without, Vidhava means one who is without her husband. So Vidhavayaha Bhavaha Vaidhavyam. So the abstract noun form for Vidhava is Vaidhavya, and Nava Vaidhavya. Just now she has been conferred with widowhood by fate. So Nava Vaidhavyam Pratipadayishyata Vidhina, she was now Vibodhita. And how is this state of her Vaidhavya? Asahya Vedanam. In Sanskrit, root sah is to put up with, to tolerate. So what can be borne with is sahya, and what cannot be tolerated or faced and suffered is asahya, means insufferable. So unbearable is asahya. Such was her Vedana, is pain. Asahya Vedanam Nava Vaidhavyam. So her pain was indeed intolerable. That has been bestowed upon her by Vidhi, by providence. And now she has been made to wake up and realize that she has now become a widow. So otherwise, when she fell unconscious, she didn't know what had happened to Manmatha. The very way in which the fire darted from the third eye of Lord Shiva, she knew that it would lead to some disastrous consequence, and what consequence exactly it was, she came to know only now and not earlier, and therefore she was now full of sorrow, unbearable sorrow. Vidhina pratipadayishyata navavaidhavyam asahya vedana. We'll just touch the next shloka and stop here. Next time.
अथ मोहपरायणा सती विवशा कामवधूर्विबोधिता विधिना प्रतिपादयिष्यता नववैधव्यम् असह्यवेदनम् अथ मोहपरायणा सती कामवधूः विवशा असह्यवेदनम् नववैधव्यम् असह्यवेदनम् नववैधव्यम् प्रतिपादयिष्यता विधिना विबोधिता.
The immense and unbearable sorrow for Rati, for whom the whole and soul of her life was Manmatha, and therefore she has lost the very reason for her living. In fact, she to anticipate what is said in the Sarga later, so she even thinks of committing suicide. And however, there is an Asharira Vani, so which says, "Do not end your life, he will be revived in future." So with this hope, she sustains her life. So then, though we began with the Shoka Sarga towards the end of the talk, so we also ended with the hope that she will, that Manmatha will be revived. And by the way, perhaps we must also appreciate that many times a proper raga has been chosen for singing the verses, and indeed Shahana is an excellent raga for portraying Karunarasa. The whole canto is full of Karunarasa. Listeners may have some questions to ask, so you are most welcome to send your questions to my email ID. I'll answer them as much as I can. So, namaskar everybody.